Hello guys and welcome on my YouTube channel. Today we will talk about Salesforce interview question example set number 1. So why? First of all, we would like to always train our brains to be up to date with all necessary information in Salesforce, and also I would like to help you to get good position as a Salesforce developer. So let's get started. First question is design patterns. What do you know about it and how it works? So in Salesforce, we could see usage of the following design patterns. So let's talk about singleton. The singleton pattern attempts to solve the issue of repeatedly using an object instance, but only wishing to instance it once within a single transaction context. Common uses for this pattern includes, first of all, global variable. Whilst Apex does not support global variables across execution context, this pattern allows us to create an object instance that will only ever be instantiated once within the execution context. Second use case is limiting impact of government limits. Certain system objects and methods, such as for example Apex describes, are subject to government limits. The singleton patterns allow to repeat reference to this without breaching government's limits. So next pattern is strategy. The strategy pattern attempts to solve the issue where we need to provide multiple solutions for the same problem so that one can be selected at runtime. In order to implement a strategy pattern in Apex, we need to define a family of algorithms, encapsulate each one, make them interchangeable and selectable at runtime. So how we could implement it? So first of all, we could create an interface class, the strategy, with methods that will be implemented in other classes, creating a class for each concrete strategy that implements the methods defined in the strategy interface. So conclusion about this pattern. The strategy design pattern uses aggregation instead of inheritance, allowing better decoupling between the behavior and classes that use that behavior. This allows the behavior to be changed without breaking the classes that use it, and the classes can switch between behaviors by changing the specific implementation used without requiring any significant code changes. So let's jump to the next pattern, decorator. It's extending the functionality of SObject in Apex. So for example, decorated pattern attempts to solve the issue where you need to have temporary fields for processing, like typically in Visualforce, but do not need to add those fields to the actual SObject. Next pattern is facade. The primary purpose of the facade pattern is to provide a simplifier interface to a complex class or logic. This avoids repeated code and increased maintainability. Common uses includes the following use cases. First of all, it's simplifying the execution of Apex Web Service Proxy class, simplifying the execution of custom Apex classes with complex interfaces, providing a single interface to execute methods in multiple classes. This pattern effectively abstracts one or more complex classes, simplifying their execution of the rest of the application. So conclusion, the facade design pattern increases the maintainability of the Apex code by simplifying the execution of one or a couple of complex classes within facade class. So let's jump to the composite. So what it's do? It's allowing us to treat a group of objects in a similar manner to a single instance of the object. So the composite design pattern can be used to represent an expression in Apex regardless of expression complexity. So for example, when you need to calculate value of the entire tree, so you could use this pattern to do so. So what is bulk state transition? The bulk state transition design pattern is the general pattern used to perform bulk actions in Apex based on the change of state of one or more records. For more information about any of these design patterns, please see other videos on my YouTube channel. So let's jump to the next question. It's what is just-in-time provisioning in Salesforce? In general, Salesforce attempts to match federated ID in the subject of the SAML assertion to the federation identifier field of existing user record. Then it searches for contact if needed an account. For example, if you recently added an employee to your organization and you don't need to manually create the user in Salesforce, when they log in with a single sign-on, their account is automatically created for them, eliminating the time and effort with onboarding the account. Just-in-time provisioning work with our SAML identity provider to pass the correct user information to Salesforce in a SAML 2.0 assertion. You can both create and modify account this way. Because just-in-time provisioning use SAML to communicate, your organization must have SAML-based single sign-on enabled. So now let's jump to next section related to our question. It's web services. So what are considerations while implementing integration with external system? So first of all, we need to be clear about security. Do we expose public API? Do we need to work with it, or will it be not public IP? What kind of security will be used? Will it be password and username authentication? Will it use any kind of tokens and stuff like that? What is data limits? What is actual message size? Will be used for that kind of integration. So we need to split the actual callouts to a couple based on the a number of records that it needs to include, or what is the data limits in terms of how many records should we synchronize with this web service. Next point is mapping data model. So we need to be sure where we need to perform this mapping. Will our external system have the same fields that we expose into them and stuff like that? What is the data latency requirements? So does the data need to be integrated real time into Salesforce, or is it sufficient to make the data available to Salesforce once every 2 hours? It's also allowing us to understand what kind of integration to choose. So how we should deal with duplicates? So will it use our custom duplicate management, or will it do this validation during the actual work with the callout, or how it will be handled? So how to deal with failed transaction? Will we have any kind of error handling framework? Will we send emails? Who will do it if we have to sign integration? If, for example, we will use just fire and forget pattern, how it will be handled? So the next point is data priority. As message may be sitting in the queue, is it possible that some message should be processed near real time and very important for the next system? So for example, in ETL. So what will be our error handling and logging mechanism between system, like fallout report capabilities, what we will use, how we will implement that? What kind of integration we will use? We use different integration user for different system with different profiles, so will it be the same? So for example, we need to take care about it if we would like to avoid data skews and stuff like that. So now let's talk about web service design best practices. So first of all, to be able to understand what kind of best practice we need to use, we need to understand what are key factors affecting our implementation. So should we maintain the same transaction? So it's allowing us to understand, does Salesforce need to perform anything on response, or should it just send the request and forget? Should it be synchronous or asynchronous? What will be our message size? Should it be guaranteed delivery? Should we have declarative preferred implementation, or could we use just custom code? So based on that, we could have the following points. So what are web service design best practices in Salesforce? So if we need to maintain reply, we could use request and reply. Salesforce in that case invoke a process on a remote system, wait for completion of that process, and then track state based on the response from the remote system. So in Salesforce, we could implement request and reply with external services when we use point and click based on integration from Lightning, for example, flow. External system should in that case provide open IP or integration schema, only supports in that case that integration primitive data types. So also we could use batch epics that will allow us to invoke external services. In that case, we can make callouts to external system using batch, but batch gets refresh governed limits every time. However, there are still on the place government limits on the total callouts or time of callouts in a single transaction. Please don't forget about it. So after that we have triggers, so we can make callout to external system on the data change via trigger. However, callout made must be asynchronous. This solution is not recommended for request and reply, but better suited for fire and forget. So also we have possibility to use from LVC or Visualforce via Apex, REST or SOAP request if it's needed. So next best practice for integration is fire and forget. So if based on your integration you need to use that pattern, so let's describe what it is. So in that case, Salesforce invokes a process in a remote system but doesn't wait for completion of the process. Instead, the remote process received and acknowledges the requests and then handle off control back to Salesforce. So just it. It's not performing any kind of actions on the reply and not waiting for it. What is data virtualization? So for example, Salesforce access external data in real time. This removes the need to data persist in Salesforce. So how it could be organized? So in Salesforce, we could use Salesforce Connect, and it could use OData 2 or OData 4 protocol to read data from external system. It can query, create, update, or delete data in external system, just like a standard or custom object in Salesforce. And it also support list view, page layout, custom tabs, and from another hand, what we could do is we could use Salesforce REST API. So for example, we could have a button on LVC that will allow us to do an Apex HTTP callout, for example, based on the REST service in a synchronous manner. And Salesforce, what it could do, it could send GET, a request to external system, get necessary data, and return it to us. If necessary, we could implement another pattern of data virtualization. It's when we will, in citation, when customer will click on the button, we will just let him know the data at this moment trying to be requested. Please continue to do wherever you want. So customer could continue working with his page, and after that, in a couple of minutes, he will get a notification that data is here and he could check it. So it's also one of the patterns of integration. So also we will need, as a part of design best practices, we will need to consider if it should be synchronous or asynchronous integration. Like for example, if we should use millions of records, or should we process chunks of data, should it be in general based on the integration pattern synchronous or asynchronous. So for that we need to consider. So also what we could do as website design best practices is we could implement it via publishing and subscribing, via pooling model and stuff like that. So let's jump to the next chapter. It's which WSDL we will use for integration and why. So in Salesforce we have two types of WSDL. It's enterprise and partner WSDL. So what differences we have between them? The enterprise WSDL is strongly type, but the partner WSDL is loosely type. The enterprise WSDL is tailored to the specific configuration of Salesforce. The partner WSDL can be used to reflect against any configuration of Salesforce. The enterprise WSDL changes if modifications, for example, custom field or custom object changes, are made to an organization Salesforce level, but the partner WSDL is static and hence does not change if modifications are made to a Salesforce organization configuration. So what are types of SSO and what is SAML? A single sign-on is a process that allows network user to access all authorized network resources without having to log in to them separately. Single sign-on allows us to validate usernames and password against our corporate user database or other client application rather than having separate user password managed by Salesforce. So we have two types of SSO. It's federated and delegated. The system that authenticates user is called an identity provider. The system that is trust the identity provider for authentication is called the service provider. If federated single sign-on authentication is enabled, then Salesforce does not validate user password. Instead of validation user password, Salesforce verifies in general an insertion of the HTTP post request and allows single sign-on if assertion is true. If assertion is false, Salesforce does not allow SSO. What about delegated single sign-on? Delegated SSO authentication is a second type of SSO in Salesforce, and if this type is enabled in Salesforce, allow web services to our organization to establish authentication credential to the user instead of validating the user password. SAML is an open standard authentication protocol that Salesforce uses for SSO into Salesforce org from an external identity provider. So we can also use SAML to automatically create user accounts within just-in-time user provisioning, which we already discussed. So what is the difference between SOAP and REST API? So if you will get that kind of question, you could list big number of different points, but at least you should say the following, like SOAP API support data in the form of XML only, REST API support both XML and JSON formats. For SOAP API, it's require WSDL for integration, and we could use SOAP API in any language that support web services. For the REST API, we could say that it's preferred for mobile and web apps since JSON being lighter and apps run smoother and faster. So you could, as I said, add additional points to that answer. Next question is web service certificate types and SSL. So in Salesforce, we have two types of certificates, self-signed certificate and CA certificate, signed certificate. So both can be created on Salesforce in section certificate and key management. After we get downloaded certificate, sign-in request have extension CSR. So what we should do is we should send the certificate request to the certificate authority of our choice. So after certificate authority will send back the signed certificate, we'll need to go back to certificate and key management, click the name of that certificate and click upload signed certificate. So the CA signed certificate must match the certificate created in Salesforce. So if you will try to upload different certificate, the upload will fail. To complete in general upload process, we will need to click save, and after our uploaded CA signed certificate, the status of that certificate will be changed to active in our system and we will be able to use it. So if we will try to connect to a third party and use self-signed certificate, we will need to share the Salesforce certificate with external system so they can add that certificate to their key store. If we will try to connect another application with within our organization, we will need to configure our web server to request a client certificate. This process depends on the type of web application server that we use. So what API is used for data loader? So it's not a really common question, but sometimes it's showing up. So in general, bulk API is optimized to load or delete large number of records asynchronously. It is faster than SOAP-based API due to the parallel processing and favor network around tips. By default, data loader uses SOAP-based API to process records, but if you want to configure your data loader to use bulk API for inserting, updating, abserting, deleting, and hard deleting records, we need to open data loader, find settings, and select use bulk API option and click OK. Next question, what is Apex transaction? An Apex transaction represents a set of operations that are executed as a single unit. This operation includes DML operations, SQL operations. So all DML operations in a transaction either get completed successfully or get rolled back completely if an error occurs even in a saving in single records. So why use batch Apex instead of normal Apex? There are various reasons why batch Apex is better than normal Apex. A normal Apex uses 100 records per cycle to execute SQL queries. but batch Apex does same in 200 records per cycle. So it's very fast when we're executing SQL queries in Salesforce. A normal Apex can retrieve 50,000 SQL queries, but batch Apex could retrieve 50 million records. A normal Apex has a heap size equal to 6 megabytes, but batch Apex has a heap size equal to 12 megabytes. So when executing bulk records, normal Apex classes are more vulnerable to encounter errors as compared to batch Apex. The latter is normally errorless. To just sum up, we could use batches if we need to have asynchronous logic, if we should have a lot of callouts, if we would like to have better limits, and if it's necessary to chain our batches. So thank you very much for the attention. If that video was useful for you, please post a comment and let me know, so I will know that I need to prepare next sessions of that kind of video. Subscribe on my YouTube channel if you want, and bye bye.